Ren Faire fans! Today we'll be jumping into an interview with a very special guest. Dr. Tony Korol-Evans wrote a doctoral thesis on ethnographic and theatrical concepts featuring Renaissance festivals. Today we'll be talking with her about her published book, her experiences at the Maryland Renaissance Festival, as well as her performances across the nation. My name is Victoria Van Arnhem, and I am joined today on Ren Talks by our co-hosts Nicole Skelly and Olivia Harding. Hello, ladies!
Hello, hello!
Hello! So we just learned that you are not Ms. Korol-Evans, but you are Dr. Korol-Evans, and I think that's amazing. But for our viewers/listeners, what is your PhD?
I have an interdisciplinary PhD in theater and drama from Northwestern University.
Awesome.
So yeah, they were kind enough to let me do my PhD on Renaissance festivals, as opposed to the University of Maryland, which didn't think Renaissance festivals were worthy enough of study. So I got my master's degree there in theater history lit crit by writing my thesis on the National Hockey League.
Oh my gosh.
Right. Yes. So University of Maryland didn't think that Renaissance festivals were worthy of study, but they thought that the Hockey League was for a theater degree. But Northwestern was perfectly fine with me doing it on the Renaissance Festival. Yeah.
So I need to say first off, because a couple episodes ago, we learned that I am a total teacher's pet, a total Ravenclaw. And I feel like this is one of my greatest fears because I haven't done the homework because my copy of this book is still in the mail. But you have written your is it your thesis, Renaissance Festivals?
This was my dissertation at Northwestern, at least part of it. And then I got a contract to turn it into a book. And it was expanded then. The second chapter and the sixth chapter were greatly expanded.
Amazing. And so it's called Renaissance Festivals Marrying the Past and Present. Love a good pun. I just bought the third to last new copy on Amazon, but there's lots of used copies available on Amazon. But can I read the description that they have on Amazon? Because it makes me tingle. It makes me really excited. The ethnographic study of contemporary American Renaissance fairs focuses on the Maryland Renaissance Festival, in which participants recreate 16th century England through performances of theater, combat at arms, processions, street hawking, and meticulously faithful historical reconstructions. It is also partly an autobiographical account of interactive improvisation, subcultures within the festival framework, the delineation between living history and historical elaboration, and a new understanding of performers and patrons.
Pretty much sums it up.
Yeah.
It's amazing how like 4 years of my life can just be summed up like in a paragraph, but that really did do a good job of it.
No, it's summed up in like 183 pages.
Yeah, and there was like so much that was cut out.
Wow.
Really?
So what we're saying is, what I'm hearing is that you need to do a second version, revised and expanded, second edition.
What's interesting is that, this book was written, the original book was written, the dissertation was written between 2004 and 2006. And then the book was written between 2007 and 2008 and published in 2009. And so 11 years, a lot has changed. And there's just been a lot of different things that have happened on the circuit in the last 11 years. I think that really kind of play into some of the things I was talking about. There's some things that I felt like needed greater exploration that I didn't get a chance to go more in depth. Like you could do an entire book on patron and performer interaction. Like I felt like that's an area that just needed to be explored more. It's a chapter, but it could be a whole book on it. And so there's just a lot of different things. And there hasn't been a lot of scholarly work done on contemporary American Renaissance festivals. I am eternally grateful to Jen Gunnels, who kind of blazed the trail. She was one of the first people to get even a thesis published on it and a dissertation. She got her dissertation on it, but was had to fight like all the way through for it to be considered worthy of study. And so she kind of paved the way. And then there's one other book that came after mine, but it has a completely different focus and is not, was not appreciated by some people in the Renaissance Festival circuit because it seemed to talk about people in the circuit in a somewhat derogatory way. And I know, for example, I had a long conversation with Jules Smith Sr. before he passed away, the owner of the Maryland Renaissance Festival. And he said, you know, he kept my book on his nightstand. He used that book as kindling. And that was he was not real happy with the portrayal of people at Faire. It dug into a lot of the kind of the history that people talk about that's kind of the mythical type stuff that, you know, the stories grow as time goes on. And, you know, so it's all the thing. And I want to know where the orgies are because, you know, we've all heard about them. I live in the campground and yet the only thing I hear after 10 o'clock at night is snoring.
So true. Like, when would we get the energy to have orgies? Like, we kill ourselves every day, like 10 hours a day in the blazing heat.
I don't, or the pouring rain, or the snow, or the whatever. I mean, you know, and sometimes all of those in one season if you're in Maryland. So yeah, I don't understand, first of all, where you get the energy to have an orgy at the end of the day. If you are, you're probably not doing your job at the fair. And second of all, I don't know exactly where you're having it because I tend to walk the site at night. I love walking the site at night in the quiet, and I'll walk by and people will be maybe sitting at their booths and we'll chat and things. And you know, I have just never heard, and my husband says, he's like, you know, I think this was false pretenses because he goes, I have never found an orgy, you know, so, you know, and I mean, you know, there's always, you know, grains of truth, and there are things that happen in certain places, and we all get that. But what we are and who we are and what we do now and what we've been doing for a significant amount of time, especially people who do this full time and are on the road, like you said, who has the energy? It's like hard enough just to have a relationship. Yeah. Olivia's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what was the last thing that we had where we talked about single wenches, where you never see a single wench perform on stage? And I said, well, I'm a single wench. And they were like, no, we're talking about washing well wenches who perform alone. I was like, oh, okay, got it.
Specificity is important.
Yes.
All the single wenches, all the single wenches.
Exactly. But we've had the discussion.
Parody coming on.
Oh,
Your parody time. We've had the discussion on this channel before about how often within the theater community as a whole, the Renaissance Festival is considered bottom of the totem pole. And we've discussed why we don't think that's true, but you, as a person who's had to sort of fight in the academic realm to talk about the Renaissance Festival, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I always think that it's funny how people will, you know, say things like that. And I'm like, really? How much did you make at your last gig? Oh, wait a minute. You had to pay to perform in that show? What? Did you get a check? Because I will tell you something. I work at the Maryland Renaissance Festival. Long before I went on the road, I was working at Maryland. That was my home fair, and that's where I started. So I started there in 1998. The check always clears, and it's significant. And in my book, actually, Bob Garman has a great quote where he says something to the effect of, people tend to do theater on streets more known for legitimate prostitution than for theater, and then come and make fun of the fact that we're doing theater for 20,000 people a day when they're getting 7 people in their audience. So I kind of think that sometimes people think that if you're not doing theater for theater's sake, and you're not doing this and you're not doing that, that, you know, and, you know, if you're not doing Mammoth on the weekends, you're not, you know, doing theater. And that just irritates me to no end, because we do quality performances and we do a wide range of performances. And I know people at festival who are just, I think they're some of the most versatile performers, because I know musicians who are performing in bands but I'll run into them on the street and I'll just start to say hi and they'll engage me in a bit. And we'll start going on improv. And it's like, I had no idea you improv. You're a musician. I mean, that's not necessarily your thing. And all of a sudden they're like, oh no, I started out at Faire doing improv. We'll talk to each other later on. Or I'll be working with an actor and all of a sudden I find out that they play like 3 instruments. And I'm like, they juggle and they do this and they do that. So there's just a lot of versatility among Renaissance Festival performers. And I think to put them at the bottom of the barrel or the bottom of the rung, and I think part of that is that you get, I know that some of that equity was originally like, you can't perform at Renaissance festivals if you're equity. And then they came back and went, oh, yeah, you can, because they're not really theater. I'm like, really? Because I'd like to challenge you to put, and I would just say, for example, our Julius Caesar that we did last year, our all-female Julius Caesar, I'd put up against any Shakespeare that went on in the Washington-Baltimore metropolitan area last year.
And also, I mean, it's funny because it is a good thing that that equity allows equity actors to perform at Renaissance festivals, don't get me wrong. But when you were talking about 20,000 people, also because of the amount of space that Renaissance festivals take up, Renaissance festivals are usually in like rural suburbs. They are sort of in deep country areas a lot of the time. Not always, like you have I think it's the Las Vegas festival that happens in the streets. But that means that you're reaching people who often don't see the Broadway tours that go on. They don't see any other theater. And so you're able to touch people with live performance who never see live performance otherwise, which I think a lot of people forget.
Yeah, and I think that's, one of the things, like Maryland, we're in a major metropolitan area. I mean, we're not far from Baltimore or DC, and we're, 5 minutes from Annapolis. But we started doing Street Sphere 5 years ago, where we started doing bits and pieces of Shakespeare out in the street, because there's a certain group of people that will come to the Globe Theater at Maryland to watch a Shakespeare play. Street Sphere is not just for those people. Street Sphere is for anybody. It's done in the street. It's a guerrilla theater. It just pops up out of nowhere, and all of a sudden it's just random acts of Shakespeare and his contemporaries. And it has become one of the most wildly popular programs that we have ever done at Maryland, to the point where after the first year, I was talking with our artistic director, Carolyn Spedden. We were talking about, it's like people are collecting Street Spears. And so the next year we had a bingo card. And you go and you get your card stamped at all the different Street Spears and you turn it in. And then there's a drawing at the end of the year for a fabulous prize, which I think is like tickets to next year's fair or something like that, And we get people who they compete with their friends to see how many cards they fill out. We have people who filled out 2 and 3 cards, which means they're seeing 18 or 20. One year we did 35. We did the entire canon. Our artistic director does not consider Two Noble Kinsmen to be canon. So we did the entire canon. And we were doing As You Like It. So that was the center space, and it was, free because we did it at opening gate. And then, some of the Life of Man, Stephen Kirkpatrick did the Jacques. The speech was just awesome because he's such an amazing performer. And I mean, and here you're talking about somebody like Stephen, who he and his husband Charles have been performing in professional theater for over 25 years. I mean, they were at Memphis Playhouse for years, and before they moved to the DC area. And are, they're, both professional actors, and Stephen is just one of the most amazing Shakespeare actors. And so, you have this opportunity, though, to bring Shakespeare out into the street, and also to bring some of the contemporaries that people would never, ever see. Some, really interesting late medieval and early modern pieces. And it's just been such a popular program, and then people get little pins, and it's really cool. I mean, it's just a really amazing thing to see. So when people start denigrating what we do, and I look at like our stage acts and our musicians that we have and that I've seen across the country, and how hard they work and how entertaining they are, and see, as I'm walking through the village, packed stage after packed stage after packed stage, and you have so many choices, and yet I'll walk past. I've seen Nicole, lyric stage, doing the Gwendolyn show, and packed. I walk past and I see Topsy Turvy over on Fortune, packed. You walk past the White Hart, you can't get a seat because the musicians are just packing people in there in the Boar's Head. But yet I've gone out and I perform locally. I perform in local venues, and we're lucky if we get 50% capacity, right? If I'm doing a local show, if you get 50% butts in the seat, you're happy. And I'm like, we have standing room only at a lot of shows in a venue that has 8 stages. We're all like that.
Yeah, it's true.
So I don't buy into it. And I remember having a discussion with my dissertation advisor where she was like, what makes this professional theater? And, and so after talking and explaining a lot of these things, she was like, I get it now. I really get it now. And she was like, I didn't understand before because I'd never been to a fair. She didn't, she'd only heard about them. She'd never seen one. She'd never been to one. And only after I sat there and, really explained it, she's like, okay, I get it. I understand why you say this, this, and this about it.
Sometimes I think people just look down on it simply because it's outside of the elements. Like I had an experience in one of the fairs where a friend of mine who was a performer there, like a local performer, introduced me to someone that either she had gone to college with or taken classes in college with or something. And he used to do the festival, but now he does more like theater. And he's like, yeah, I moved up, and he wasn't trying to be a jerk about it. But I thought about it and I was like, I write and direct my own shows and I have big audiences some places. You moved up to indoors? Like that's the only thing I could think of is that he was like, now I'm indoors, I don't have to be in the sun.
Yeah, but yet people revere things like Shakespeare in the Park or, Oregon Shakespeare Festival or things like that. And you just look at it and you go, why are you making this designation? And I do think that part of it does have to do with the history of fairs. And it has to do with the fact of where fairs came from. And some of those stories that, are part of the history of fairs that, it came out, festivals sprang out of a time of upheaval. And most new forms of theater do. Most new forms of theater, if you look at all of the theatrical movements and you can go through all of expressionism and surrealism and all these things and Brechtian theater, they all come out of times of upheaval. And Renaissance festivals were no different. First Renaissance festivals in 1963. You are coming out of, you're in the middle of the civil rights movement. You have the death of a beloved president. You see the explosion of this as we are seeing, things like the Summer of Love and Haight-Ashbury. You're seeing the Vietnam War. You're seeing this huge amount of upheaval. And theater is always a reflection, certainly, of what is going on in the world. And in a way, Renaissance festivals, by telling history, is kind of a cautionary tale of if you forget history, it's doomed to repeat itself. And it's also the place where it's kind of, there's the Carnivale. It's a place where you can go and you can, I say we have at Maryland, for example, because we're right outside of Washington, D.C., there are a lot of people who come there who work for agencies that have a lot of letters in their name. And you would never know that by the way they act on the weekends and the personas that they play as patrons or sometimes as performers. Because we have people who work there who work for places like NSA or worked for CIA. And, we have people from Secret Service who hang out at the White Hart Tavern. And so you get all of these people who come who normally during the week are doctors and lawyers and all of those things. And on the weekend, they're like, I don't want to have responsibility. I want to come and experience Carnivale. I want to come and experience this world turned upside down. Everything's different. And even the bawdiness that people look to at the festival, it's really funny because it's very historical. And so I always laugh because people are like, oh, it's all the boobs are showing. The boobs are showing. And I'm like, yes, but you know what's not showing? Our shoulders or our ankles. Do you know why? Shoulders and ankles have no purpose. Shoulders and ankles have no purpose in the Renaissance. That's why they didn't show them. You covered them. Boobs were shown because they had a purpose. They gave life. That's why they were up there. They were up there and they were out there because sometimes you had to pop one out.
And feed somebody. I was actually looking at that recently, that it's not just Renaissance, that it's up until late 1800s that it was completely acceptable to pop one out because they have a purpose.
They have a purpose. Yeah. But ankles, God forbid you showed your ankles. Women were fined. One of the reasons why women, they invented side saddle later on towards Elizabeth's reign, is when side saddle riding, is that it was very hard for a woman to ride astride a horse and keep her ankles covered, because you have to have a very long skirt to do that.
Yep.
It's very hard to do that. So side saddle, though, it's much easier because your ankles have no purpose. Your shoulders have no purpose.
In Elizabethan side saddle, it didn't start out with one leg hooked over the thing. It started out with them actually sitting to the, like, facing on the side with like a board that they rested their feet on.
With both of the feet on.
Yeah.
And that was coming because riding astride, it was the thing about riding astride was, oh my goodness, your ankles are showing. And I actually did a show back in 1999 where at Maryland, where I was learning how to ride because it was going to be my character's job to ride for the midwife when the head of the household who was pregnant was ready to give birth. And we had a woman who was really very pregnant at the time. And so we were playing into the storyline. And Lady Breaville, who was one of our horsewomen, and Sir Barkhan, who was one of the jousters, had a show that they would do. And they had a show, they did night school, and they had a little area with that horse. And so they were teaching me how to ride. And the man playing my husband, who was about 30 years my senior, would come up and just, man, you're showing your ankles. What's the matter with you? You know, and it was just the thing. And it was a very historical moment. And then he would berate me. I would get down. We would have this huge argument. And then we would explain to everybody why this was just such a thing. And it seems so funny to us and our sensibilities as we walk around in shorts and stuff. But I have found that, you know, when people will say stuff to me at Faire about, you know, the girls being up there or something like that, and I'll be like, yes, but at least I'm not showing my ankles. And all of a sudden they're like, what? And then it's a great teaching moment. Or well, but I can see your shoulders, you know, because they're going to be using tank tops, right? Because I'll tell you what, if I'm going to Faire for fun to watch Faire, in 80, 90 degree weather, I'm wearing shorts and a tank top. I'm not going there.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if there isn't a paycheck coming and somebody ain't making it rain, I ain't wearing a costume.
I feel you on that for sure. I say that, and if you want me, so I wear a lot of makeup at Faire, and it's like, if you want me to put on my fake eyelashes, there better be a check involved in the process.
Yeah.
Money is a requirement.
I will dress up anytime.
I will dress up, but I will say that I used to have the dream of being nobility. Like I mentioned in a past episode that my dream was to become Queen Elizabeth because obviously she's wonderful. And then at a certain point, working at festivals, I went, no, I will never be noble in a million years because then I have to pretend that I care what I look like.
I have literally played everything from down in the dirt. Like when we did the lineup of the cast, I looked to my right and there was one person who was lower, two people that were lower status than I was. And that's only because I was married and they weren't. And everybody else was up here. I have played down in the dirt peasant. I've played the village gambler, games mistress, who's really down in the dirt. I've played pirates, low, and I've played the reigning monarch at a fair. So I've played, and I've played middling class, I've played queens, ladies, I've played everything in between. And they all have their advantages and their disadvantages. They're very different. It is very different to play a peasant, to play a middle class, to play somebody with a really strong profession. I play a cook right now, which is the easiest thing on earth because it's a strong profession to play. Than it is to you know, and then court has its own thing. It's easier for people to approach you in your court because you're wearing the pretty gown, and it's easy for people to come up and talk to you because they want a picture. But there are things as court ladies that you can't do, or if you do, you tend to get in trouble for. Not that I would know anything about that.
And for anyone that doesn't know what Tony was just talking about, looking to the left or looking to the right, there's an exercise that you can do with casts where you line up all of the cast members who are in their character, with one end being the very lowest status, lowest station character, so like a mud beggar way down at the bottom, and the other end being the reigning monarch. And you look to one side to everyone who's lower than you, and those are all the people that should kind of show you deference and everything. That puts you in the lineup, bow to you. And you look to the other side towards the monarch, and those are all the people that you have to show deference to, just to get your idea of where your place in the village hierarchy are, because Elizabethans were very, like, they knew that stuff. Like, they were very on that stuff.
There's no such thing as equals in Tudor society. Even if you were both dukes, one had precedence over the other by who was made duke first. It could be by 5 minutes, but that was a lifetime that it had precedence. So,
and going back to where Renaissance fairs sit in like theater society, this is something that almost every theater class I've ever been in starts with an exercise on status. That status defines how you perform on a stage or in life. Like, I remember someone once told me, and it really was eye-opening, that the reason why elevators feel so weird is it's because everyone in an elevator is trying to pretend not to have status, and it's impossible. So your voice, like your pitch of your voice changes depending on what status you're trying to have. The way you walk changes, the way you stand changes depending on the status you're trying to have, both in life and on stage. And so the Renaissance Fair, because the Renaissance dealt with status in every aspect of every part of life in such an obvious way, is such a great place to start out thinking about status. And that's why, and I was going to talk about this when we were talking about like where theater, Renaissance Fair sits into the theater ladder. I think that a lot of people look down on Renaissance fairs because they are a educating working environment. And a lot of people, a performance cast can have anyone from like a actual Broadway theater, like for example, New York Renaissance Festival. There are people who go on to do Broadway productions in the performance cast. And then you have someone who's never acted before in their life and might never act again. And that's what's beautiful about it. And that might be a reason why people look down on it, because you will have all ranges of experience and talent. But I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the Renaissance Festival, is that if you have the passion, if you have the willingness to work, you will be accepted.
Yeah, and I think people do different things at Faire. And I think sometimes part of it is that being on cast is not the only way to be a part of Faire. Obviously, you all are perform with a musical group, a solo. You write and do your own show. I do both. But I've also been a vendor. So I've been a merchant. I was telling you earlier that I work for a cigar booth. And so for a year, I was the village cigar girl. And Fairs found out that this was just like a huge bonus to them, because they were getting a village character they weren't having to pay for. Because while I was out selling cigars, I was telling stories, because that's how you sold cigars. So I had stories about, just everything that had to do with tobacco, cigars, the Pope. Oh yeah, this was at Florida. It was Pope attested, Pope approved. Wait a smoker coming out of the chapel when they elected a new Pope, a CAO Italia. You didn't know? I know, it's good cigar. So, I've done that. I ran a bar at Bristol Renaissance Festival called The Leather Bottle. So I've run a pub at a fair. I've been a merchant at a fair. I've been on cast at a fair. My husband and my son and I have an acting troupe where we've gone out and been hired to go to fairs and do, with our troupe is a class act, Robes to Royals. So basically we're plug and play. What do you need? Like, where are you deficient? That's where you put us. So we literally had one fair where they had hired a court for one day. They hired a court for Saturday, but not for Sunday or Monday of Memorial Day weekend. And so Saturday we played our pirates, and Sunday and Monday, the three of us were the court.
Oh my
And we did
God.
the knighting ceremony. We did, yeah. So literally, it was a small fair in the Midwest on the Midwest Circuit in Amana Colonies. It's like I said, tiny little fair, but the check cleared. And we got a lovely 100-year-old Scottish bocce set that we use still to this day. Yes, you have to come do bocce with us. We got a 100-year-old Scottish lawn bowling set that we use to do lawn bowling at Faire. But we did that fair. We did Nebraska, which is also a small fair, which was a plug and play, where they were just like, okay, we need additional courtiers. Come on in and do courtiers. So we came in and met with the queen. We had like a half-hour meeting before the first cannon, and boom, we were there. So we've done that, and now we have the show that my husband and I do. When we go on the road at Maryland, I do the show right now with Charles Boynton, but on the road, my husband and I do it, and that's Cakes and Ale. And our new show, Casks and Flasks, which was going to debut at Maryland this year, but as so many other sentences this year have ended because COVID. So we'll debut next year, hopefully, at Maryland or somewhere else.
But you have been producing this Cakes and Ale on the internet, is that correct?
Yeah, we're doing Cakes and Ale online. We were booked to do Da Vinci Con, a first-year fair in Virginia, and we had been booked to do that. And when that fair canceled, by about the first week of April, I had already figured out we weren't going to have Maryland. I think the Smiths did everything they could to try to hold that fair. But I also think that they realized when they couldn't, and they wanted to give everybody enough notice. And I am thankful beyond belief to them for making the decision they made, because with the way the numbers are spiking, I don't think we're opening. And so I said, we have to find a way to replace that income. And this is the part that people really don't understand, is that it's income. And even though my husband and I have day jobs, and we are thankful, because unlike so many of you who are doing this full time, there's so many people out there that this is their only livelihood. We have day jobs, but we still were losing an eighth of our net income, a 12th of our gross income, and an eighth of our net income comes from the Maryland Renaissance Festival or other performances. And that's a chunk of change. So we decided to start doing Cakes and Ale online, and we did a Patreon, and we donate 20% of everything that we make, 10% to rescue and 10% to RC, because we know that everybody right now is like, again, we have day jobs. We are fortunate, and we both have jobs where we're teleworking. So our jobs have been incredibly supportive, and we're very fortunate. So we want to give back to the community as much as we can. But Cakes and Ale Online has kind of taken on a life of its own. It's morphed as we've seen what people wanted and what people asked for. And one of the things is, when things started getting better, we started going out and doing reviews of places that had opened back up, wineries, distilleries, breweries, cideries, meaderies, places that were outside where you could have social distancing, where they were doing proper sanitation. And I will tell you, there are some places we went where we didn't get out of the car. Like, we drove up and went, oh, that's a no. we're not, no. And we did reviews of places as things were opening up, and said, listen, this is what they're offering. This is what their safety measures are. This is what they serve. And I mean, taking one for the team, because we're givers. We tasted a lot of beer and a lot of booze.
That must have been really hard for you guys. I'm so sorry.
I appreciate your effort and your sacrifice.
We do it for you. We do it for the people. It's something. It's hard. It's hard, but we got to do it. Yeah.
Is that in the Maryland area-ish? Forgive my ignorance on that.
We literally have done Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and we're currently in Missouri.
Oh my gosh.
So we will be bringing you some reviews from the Heartland in the next couple of weeks, because that's where we are.
Where online, I'm assuming Facebook, can people find your Cakes and Ale program?
Yeah, facebook.com, cakes, /cakes and ales.
Thank you.
And we do Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific. Sorry, Pacific people. Trying to get the East Coast people to be like 8 o'clock will be fine. So they're all on the Facebook page. And then so the first week we do Casks and Flasks, which is kind of right now our review of distilleries, wineries, meaderies, cideries, basically anything that involves alcohol. Yeah. And then, because we're givers. And then week 2 is conversations with Cecily and Arnold. So it's talking about all things Faire, Maryland specific, or questions about the road, questions about Faire history, questions about Tudor history. Week 3, we've been doing Renaissance recipe research in 1 week. So I get a recipe, because I play the village cook at Maryland. I get a recipe Wednesday night after week 2 is over. I have 1 week to research the recipe, figure out what all the words are, what all the ingredients are, find them, and then cook it and see if it turns out.
How many of them turn out?
So far, I've been pretty lucky. Learned a couple of things, made a lamb pie. It was way too sweet the first time we made it, so we had a bunch of the meat left over, so we cut it half and half with beef for the second pie that we made, and we found that that was a lot better. So then I adjusted the recipe, because when I do my cooking, a lot of times when I redact recipes, it will take one or more than one time, 2 or 3 times, to kind of figure out like what's the right mixture of things. And now I only really have one shot at it, so I'm having to make the changes after the fact. We're like, okay, we tried this was too sweet, this was too but I recently did the last one I did, which we haven't even gotten to do the show yet, was like a cherry dessert that turned out really well. So I'm looking forward to that. It would be a great thing to pour over the top of ice cream, I think.
Ooh, I do like a good a la mode.
Yeah, it was really good. And it's made with wine, so, because I cook with wine. And sometimes it goes in the food.
I have some questions. So the name of your book is Renaissance Festivals, Marrying Past and Present. There is a word in here that you speak about quite a bit, and I am hesitant to try and pronounce it.
Intrastice.
Thank you. There are states of intrasticity, and intrasticical, intrasticitive, and intrastitious.
Interstitious, yes. So I look at the interstice to me is the overlap of 16th century England and 21st century America. And I originally started out with a theory that was from Victor Turner, who wrote From Ritual to Theater. And he had something called liminality, which was a state that was neither here nor there, neither then nor now. And I originally started out with that, and I presented a paper, and this wonderful woman from Australia said, yours is very filled space. His is an empty space. And she said, it's not a liminal space. Your space isn't empty. It's not neither here nor there, neither then nor now. It's both here and there, both then and now. And I'm like, yeah, it is. So I went back to my dissertation advisor after going to this, very fancy International Federation of Theater Researchers conference. And I'm like, I want to rewrite Victor Turner, who is like a sacred cow, right? And you know what they say about sacred cows? They make great burgers. But I'm like terrified, because I'm literally going to my dissertation advisor and saying, I want to rewrite like one of the greatest minds of theater history theory, right? And she's like, he wrote that like 25 years ago. It's time for him to be rewritten. And I was like, and my dissertation advisor was like, amazing. Okay, so she was like 46 years old when she won like the American Society for Theater Research Lifetime Achievement Award. At 45. I'm like, she has like 7 books, 13 chapters in books, 42 articles in journals. I mean, she's just amazing, Dr. Tracy Davis. And so I'm like, I was terrified. And she was like, no, I think that you have to do that. So we talked about it, and intrastice is within as opposed to interstice. So interstate is going out of state, intrastate is within. So I came up with the intrastice, which is that space where it's overlapping. And because you're experiencing both things at the same time, and how deep you go, it's kind of like a V, a funnel. The first level is the level that a lot of people engage in theater at. We talk about the willing suspension of disbelief, right? Oh yes, there's my funnel.
What page is that on?
Awesome.
So we'll include this in the visual podcast, which will be on YouTube and Facebook. This is on page 9. Page 9. It includes the funnel.
So when you talk about that first level, it's that normal level of theater going. I'm willing suspension of disbelief. I'm willing. So I use Peter Pan as an example. So you're going to see Peter Pan, willing suspension of disbelief. We're going to pretend people are flying, whatever, right? So then the next level down where you start to get into it is where you're playing at belief, right? So let's say you go to Peter Pan, but you go with your 4-year-old niece. And so it cuts to the point where they say, clap for Tinkerbell to save Tinkerbell's life. So you're like, I'm going to clap for Tinkerbell. Honey, are you going to clap for Tinkerbell? So you're playing at believing, like you're actually doing something to play at believing. Your niece is at that deepest level of the intrastice. She really believes that clapping for Tinkerbell is going to save her life, right? That's where, because children play. And as adults, we lose that sense of play and that sense of belief and that sense of, and what festival does, and those of us who do festivals, we don't really lose that. We really enjoy that, and we bring that out in other people. And so this is why you have the people who come to the festival, like the Maryland Renaissance Festival, who literally work for the CIA, and yet they come on the weekend and they're the best miller in the village. Now, they don't work there, they're a patron, but they can tell you all about their grain and how it brews the best beer because they've created this character for themselves and their friends, and they're doing their thing. And that's when you get into that level. And so that depth of belief in the intrastice is where I see festival works at all 3 of those levels. And for a person who comes, it really just depends on where you want to go. I know people that don't even engage in the first level. They come to the festival because it's a performative shopping mall.
And there's beer.
And there's beer.
Yeah.
Beer can lead to some really interesting participation in the intrastice. Both good and not so much. Mm-hmm. But, there are people who come who aren't really, they're not there to play. They're not, and especially as a performer, that is something you have to suss out like that. Like you have to be able to suss that out in the streets really quickly where somebody is in that level. And I always say, this is why, when they talk about, how people who are in theater wait tables and 10 bars. And I say, I have 3 degrees in theater. I have waited a lot of tables. I've tended a lot of bars. It makes me a great improv person because it's the same thing as when you're a server and you're going up to a table and you have to decide, does this table just want me to drop off their menu, drop off their drinks, drop off their food and have no other interaction? Do they want me to chit chat with them a little bit? Or do they want me to kneel down by their table while they tell me their life story? I am sure that hairdressers probably same thing. Yeah. So bartenders, same thing, right? So there's certain professions that are like that. And as an improv performer, you have one shot to figure this out. And if you guess wrong, you better be able to pivot really quickly. Because if you think somebody really wants to play and they don't, you're going to get a cold shoulder. And if you just try to slightly engage somebody who really wants to play, they're going to want to drag you in. And you need to be able to pivot and be like, okay, yeah, this person really does want to play. And sometimes it's so funny that the people that are there that are like, you would think that the more somebody's dressed up, the more they would want to play. And that's not necessarily the case. I have had the most fun with people who maybe have one tiny piece of accoutrement. Maybe they've bought a hat that day, or they have a pouch, or they're carrying a new mug, and they're just starting on this adventure. And those are the people that I just love to just have at with and talk about, ask them where they got what they got, talk about it. What are they enjoying about the day? They'll answer questions that they have. And then you find that's where you start going down into those different levels and digging down into it. And, you'll see people who get really, really invested. I've done 2 different death marches at the Maryland Renaissance Festival. I was there the year that we marched Anne Boleyn off back in 2004, which is the year that's focused on in the book. And there were a group of guys from the Boar's Head who decided that Anne had gotten a raw deal. Henry was the worst in the world, and they were going to save her. And they tried to kidnap the queen out of the "we're marching her off to take her away to go to the Tower" moment. And it really involved a lance connect with a Zweihander, and that did not stop them. However, the female lance connect follower who pulled the rondelle out from in between her boobs was what finally got them to believe she would actually beat them about the head if they tried to lay a hand on the queen. This happened. And then in 2014, I was the Duchess of Buckingham in the year that was literally labeled the death of Buckingham. And so at the end of the day, my husband was marched from the Globe Theater, which is towards the back of the village, all the way to the front by the maypole. And we followed behind, and we had hundreds of people that would follow us. And then they go to take him off, and he gives this beautiful final speech. And then there was a thing that happened afterwards that was all completely improv. We hadn't even talked about it. It just happened. And then once it happened, the first day, it happened every day. But people were very much like the guy who was playing, I think it was Boleyn. And he was the one who got very snotty with me after they had taken my husband off. And I made him bow to me. And when he went to scurry off, he was like, there were times he was a little bit in fear that people were going to stop him from leaving. They certainly weren't going to let him follow me. We turned on our heels and went off stage. But he said there were times when people like blocked his way and were like really angry with him for being so rude. It was like,
What you were saying about like being able to sense the kind of audience member some person will be, it makes me think of, I've talked to other groups about inviting an audience member up, having an audience volunteer, and the split second just scan analysis you need to do of the audience, and how it's not always just sort of enthusiasm and being into something, and how the way I think about it is almost like a D&D alignment chart. But instead of good to evil, you have enthusiastic to unenthusiastic to enthusiastic, and sometimes it's better to have a lawful, unenthusiastic person versus a chaotic, enthusiastic person up on the stage with you, because you never know what'll happen.
When you've picked the wrong person and you know, like within the instant that you've picked the wrong person, like you do it, and then you see the look on their face the minute you do it, and you go, oh, this is going to go sideways really fast. And you're already plotting how you're going to get out of it. You're laughing because you've had to do this.
I once had to do it with a child. My worst audience experience ever, I think, was there was a child who we were asking for items. We were doing that classic improv game where we like present items and the person's arms is through another person's armpits and they're doing the arm stuff for the other person. We needed props. So I'm going around asking for props, and this is a stage show, like big proscenium theater. And this little girl, maybe 4 years old, is screaming that she wants to give us her teddy bear. Like, take my teddy bear, take it or else. And so I was like, oh, not thinking, scared of the little child, okay, I'll take your teddy bear. Never, ever take a teddy bear away from a 4-year-old, even if she's begging you to, because then we just had a screaming 4-year-old for the rest of the scene. And the second I was on the stage with a teddy bear, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake.
When I had the sword fighting show, when I was in the Steel Sisters, it was, I picked the people out of the audience for the majority of the time. And I was like 98% of the time I was on it, and it was great. And part of the reason for that was that like my show partner had a whole bunch of lines where I could just look at the audience and like, that person, okay, that person, oh, that person. Like there were 2 specific jokes that I would check in on my people. And if they laughed at those jokes and were paying attention and not looking around or at their phone, I was like, okay, they're a candidate. And with a solo show, it's a little bit harder to do that because I have to be talking and be reacting to everything that's happening in the audience. So I can't use part of my brain to pick someone. But we were doing TRF, and I picked someone. I was very excited, and I brought him up, and he did not speak English. And so I gave my partner the option to give him back, to throw him back. And she was like, nope, we're going to do this. It worked out fine. I think we have his friend up to translate or something, but no, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. But so sometimes you know when you go pick them immediately, like, this person's not going to be good. And then sometimes you don't know until you ask them to talk.
Victoria, how have you been with your child, teaching them the dulcimer?
Right, so I have a bit in my show where I choose a child volunteer, typically, and I bring them up and we play the dulcimer together, and it's kind of a foolproof bit. Like, even if they mess up, it's okay. If the bit just kind of like flatlines, it's not the end of the program. It's not like a major clincher for the show. But yeah, they range in capacity, and I'm really, because there's no way to tell, honestly. Like, sometimes, like, the 7-year-olds can follow along and get it just right, and it's like, bang, that's fantastic. And sometimes the 18-year-old just, like, face plants because they're too nervous. And it's like, all right, either one. But it's always such a treat when I get a kid that can follow along, like, it's a follow the leader kind of thing. They follow along, they get it, and then they look at you and they're like, like, I just did that, like, and then the crowd claps and everybody claps, and then they go off the stage, and it's wonderful, and everybody, like, they have thusly presented on stage, and it's like,
that is so cool. And that's what's great about, they say never work with dogs or children.
Kids are terrifying. 10 out of 10 don't suggest, but that's my show.
I did a show once at Maryland where I was teaching people how to play the lap dulcimer, teaching kids. Oh. And so what I had made sheets that went underneath, and so all they had to do was follow along, and then they got a copy of the sheet to take home with them. It was very sweet. And I had little kids up there who couldn't follow along because they were too small they could barely, but it was wonderful. It was one of those shows that was just done for the kids. That was the purpose of it. I cannot imagine doing a show for an entire audience on a regular stage. No. Although we have a young man that did for the last couple of years has been our mushroom boy during the Cakes and Ale show at Maryland, and he would come and announce like what the dish of the day was or something like that, or what country we were doing the food from. But I finally said, okay, you've been our mushroom boy for 3 years. We're gonna have to stop. And he was a patron's son and patron who had come since he was babe in arms. And I finally said, but mushroom boys don't last that long. They either get promoted or, demoted, because they're the ones that have to taste the mushrooms.
Demoted 6 feet.
6 feet.
Down. I've thought of a take on one of the shows that I do now where I use adult audience volunteers. And one time I tried it because it started out with 3 audience volunteers. So I used like 2 adults and a kid, and that didn't quite play. So I changed it all up, and now it's adults. I want 2 adults. But I want to do one with a kid, but I'm not like that. I feel like I will have to prep so much more, because I can pick adults. I can pick adult volunteers to come and be part of my show. But kids, you get, like Victoria was saying, you get that age range, but you can't always tell by that age range. And to me, I can't tell age anyway. So anyone who is a kid is probably 7 to 9 years old. I have no idea. If they're shorter or they're taller, there could be 14, they're 7 to 9. I really don't know. So I'm like, unless I have very specific instructions and verbiage to say to them to get the exact result I want, because I can give an adult audience volunteer generalized instructions because I know that he could follow my exact instructions, or he could just kind of take the basic idea and do something else and add something to the show, which I love. But with kids, like, I don't want to give them too much play, because then it could just like snowball into a train wreck of a show. But I really want to bring a kid on stage with me, but I don't know why.
You know who brings a lot of kids on stage, Gypsy Jeff does a ton of kid stuff, and his kid stuff is brilliant. Like, his is such a exercise in, like, control of children. Like, that thing, he does a bit with a puppet, and he's like, you know, has them lay down on the ground, and then he has them go lower and lower and lower, and then, like, pop up, and these kids are just, like, they're just freaking out, but they are so into it and so attuned to what he's doing. And it's impressive. I don't know, but what is a mushroom boy? I am lost in the program here, folks. Y'all gotta help a girl out.
Mushroom boy was one of the jobs in a grand household where it would be probably the son of one of the other workers there. And that would be the person who would go out and help gather the mushrooms. Mushrooms often grow in places that adults can't get into, like inside of logs and, small cavernous little areas. But you also somebody has to taste the mushrooms, because there's probably about 100 different kinds of mushrooms in the tri-county areas, I say, around Oxfordshire. And probably about 70% of them are poisonous. That doesn't mean they'll kill you, but they might, put you in the privy for a week. Or it might be, as my good friend Kiva McDonough said, it was like my last time I went to Portugal. It was a very good trip. Those are the mushrooms from over there we refer to in the show. So that's Mushroom Boy. So we told him we wanted to promote him to a spit boy. It's not what you think. It's the guy who turns the spit.
Thanks.
And he's like, I don't want to stand in the hot kitchen. I'm like, you realize you're not actually doing this, right? But he's very literal. Aww. I know a lot about the households and things like that, because I run the Revelers Bower at Maryland. I manage that area, and that's the living history area, in addition to doing my show there, and doing the improv and whatever else I might be doing during the day. I kind of just manage that area with our people who do handcrafts and things like that. And I actually started out in the living history at Maryland, and so got a really good background in that. And so, and I love history. I have a library that's just filled with books.
I was about to say, I couldn't tell. It's like, no.
I find it a lot easier to riff on things when I actually know what I'm talking about. Okay. At least somewhat. At least I have enough to start with, and then I just sound so confident about it that people are like, "Oh yeah," and it's like I could be totally lying; nobody would ever know.
So I'm interested in the concept of like escapism at the fair, because you talked about people who work very strenuous jobs come out to fair to experience kind of Carnivale and things.
Absolutely. And I think that the second chapter of the book, which is on the weekend following September 11th, 2001, is a really great example of what escapism and what the festival offered. So normally the festival is the world turned upside down. It's a place where you go where you can be body and you can be anybody you want to be. And it's just this. When the world turns upside down, festival suddenly becomes the safe space, the norm. Part of the reason this year has been so hard for so many people is that the one thing they cling to, and I'm not talking about performers or vendors or people who work at Faire, I'm talking about the patrons. The one thing they cling to as that safe space and that safe haven is Faire. It's a place where everything turns out well in the end, and it's this joyous place, and it's full of mirth and merriment, and it's a place where you go to forget everything outside of the gates. And in the midst of a horrible pandemic, in the midst of racial injustice and social upheaval and a contentious election, people didn't have that to turn to. And so it really caused a lot of problems. And I can say this because having worked that weekend at Maryland following September 11th, 2001, it was one of the most touching, exhausting, unbelievable experiences of my life. Anybody who worked that weekend, we have a bond that will never be broken, because we showed up not really knowing were we even going to open. Like, we all just showed up because nobody had told us not to show up. Our ownership, again, I can't give enough of a huge shout out. Jules Smith Jr. came out, spoke to us himself and said, we are opening. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if anybody's going to show up. Baseball was closed. Football was closed. Theaters were still closed. But people have been calling and asking, so we should have some people here. We're going to donate $1 of every ticket sold for the rest of the fair to the Pentagon Relief Fund. We thank you all for coming and showing up this morning. Then he left. Our entertainment director came on, and she told everybody, if you can't do the day, that's fine. You can leave. If you need to take extra breaks, that's fine. You can do that. And by the way, if you are wearing red, white, and blue ribbons, yellow armbands, black armbands, ribbons, take them off. Because if people are coming here, they are coming here because they want to forget what they have seen on the news cycle for the last 5 days. And so people did. People had made them, and they took them off. And the whole goal of the day became, don't go backstage. Because when you went backstage, it was 2001. When I was on the street, it was 1529. And that was a good time. It was unbelievable. Every show got a standing ovation. Every line that was supposed to get a laugh got laughs. Some that never had gotten laughs before got laughs. The ones that got laughs got tremendous laughs. People were hooting and hollering and just enjoying themselves to no end. People went out of their way to thank us without breaking character, without breaking us out of character. People would come up to me. I was playing the Duchess of Norfolk that year. It was the very first time I'd ever been in court. And people would come up to me and say, I just want to say thank you for coming on your royal progress to Revel Grove today. It was like how the way people went out of their way to thank us without breaking us out of the Intrastice was unbelievable. Like they just needed something. Wow. And we were doing a show that year called The Grand Event. It was Maryland's 25th anniversary. And so we were in the middle of the Anne Boleyn, King Henry, Catherine of Aragon storyline. We took a year off from it because we wanted to do something, 25th anniversary, happy, peppy, positive, right? And so we did this grand event where it was this great show. Everybody came and gave the king gifts and all of this stuff. And if you turn to that chapter, and I don't know exactly what page it's on, but there's a quote that was in the show that Carolyn had written, who knows, May, June, maybe? And it's from Richard II, and it's John of Gaunt's This Royal Throne of Kings speech. This set isle, this little pearl set in a shining sea against nature, against infection in the hands of war. And at the end of this show, our king, who at that time was Bill Huddle, who was 6'7", 340 pounds, and looked like you would expect Henry to look. I mean, used to joke he was the only guy that ever got a musical theater degree from Catholic University on a football scholarship. True story. He would say, normally at the end of the show, he would say, "God save Revel Grove," and he would point up in the air, and everybody else would go, "God save Revel Grove," and then we would have theatrical pyrotechnics. That was when we could have theatrical pyrotechnics, Nicole.
Yeah, it's way before my time. For those who don't know, you can't use fire in Maryland at the Maryland Fair. There's no fire performance. Sorry, go ahead.
No fire. I can do fire at the Living History area if we have somebody attending it 24/7, which I don't have. So that's why we don't have a fire in our oven. But other than that, nix on the fire. So no theatrical pyrotechnics. Can't call them fireworks because we don't need theatrical pyrotechnics. And so he would go, "God save Revel Grove." We go and put his hand up like this and a finger up in the air, and everybody, "God save Revel Grove," and the theatrical pyrotechnics go off, and that was the end of it. Well, he gives this speech, which is all about England being, this.
It's on page 61, Nicole. If you want to grab that here real quick. Yeah. Do you want to? Yeah, please.
And to this royal throne.
Yeah.
And to this royal throne of kings, this sceptered isle, this earth of majesty, this other Eden, this fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war, this happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in a shining sea that doth serve in its office as a wall against the envy of less happier lands, this blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England.
So imagine this is being said on September 15th, 2001. Oh. I literally have goosebumps just hearing Nicole read it. Followed by God Save Revel Grove. And then Bill, unbeknownst to all of us, had arranged this with the stage manager, and he just spreads his arms. And you have to understand, this guy just, when he spread his arms, it just felt like he was going to hug you. And he goes, and God bless us. And then the theatrical pyrotechnics go off. And the audience loses. I mean, they stand up. They are screaming. They are hollering. I am standing next to Diane Wilshire, who is playing the Marchioness of Exeter. And the only reason that neither one of us hit the ground is that we slumped into each other. So it was like the thing where you're holding each other up. Just it's a principle of physics. And that is the only reason. If we had gone the other way, we're both down. Because we literally slumped into each other like this, because it was just like all of the energy of the day and everything. And then we stand back up and we all file out and we get backstage and like we're bawling. Like we have lost it at this point. And we took like 30 seconds and I walked back up front and I said, I am not going backstage again today. You are. There is nothing that is getting me backstage again today, except for the one time I had to go back and like strip down. We were doing a show called Dress the Duchess. I had to strip down to my civvies, and then they redressed me. And I'm like, other than that, I did not leave the front of the site for the rest of the day. I'm like, there's just no way. I'm like, I just need to be in 1529 and just be happy and peppy and wonderful and I couldn't think about it. But that was, when you want to talk about escape, that was the epitome of escape for people. People just came out. And at that point, it was the highest selling beer weekend in the history of the fair.
Oh, wow.
I believe that record has been broken now. But at that point, I mean, you have to remember, this is 19 years ago. That point, it was the highest selling beer weekend in the fair, and there wasn't a single arrest. It was just, I mean, everybody was just... And we would do, at the end of the day, we would have like we would stand outside and say goodbye to people. And people just, the effusiveness with which people were thanking us was just beyond anything. And the rest of that whole season was like that. But that very first Saturday and Sunday were crazy. And people just because it was constant. It was, there wasn't a television station that it wasn't on. I mean, God, you turned on ESPN and they were covering it. Right? Because there was no sports to cover. Right? So they were covering why there was no sports. So it was that constant news cycle. And I think that is really why this year, I think that there's a lot of people. Renaissance festivals, when I wrote my book, were bringing in more than 10 million people a year through the gates. That's a good chunk of people. Maryland itself brings through the gates nearly 300,000 people a year in 19 days. By comparison, Colonial Williamsburg, which is open 365 days a year, only brings in 1 million people.
Wow.
So when you look at festivals and you look at this, and this, again, my research is 15 years old, 14 years old, maybe at this point, that number's gone way up. So when you look at this and you look at the people who don't have that to turn to right now. This has caused, that's why things like the digital Ren Fair, people doing the stream guide that Nicole has put out, people want that so much. I mean, even I can, like just on our little cakes and ale thing, the number of people are just like, oh my God, it's not because we're really great performers. I'll be honest with you. It's because people are really desperate. No. I think we're good performers. But no, it's because people are looking for things. And Nicole, I have to tell you, I have told you this personally, but I have to tell you this, what you're doing with that Renaissance Stream Guide, I know that's got to be a ton of work to put all of that together. But I have heard so many people tell me on my stream and message me and say, oh my gosh, Renaissance String Guide, I didn't know about that. I heard about it from you. And now I've looked and I found, and I got to see this other great thing on Thursday night. And I got to go and see this. And I have this double header now. I watch you, and then I think Brune does something right after me on Wednesday night. So it's like this double header. We go from food to booze. And it's like, I'm like, or booze to booze, depending on what show you're doing. It's like, yeah. So I just want you to know, like, these are patrons, and to them right now, this is a lifeline. And I think that escapism, that you were asking about, Victoria, I think that's really what it's about. And I think that's where people just don't understand. And Broadway provides a certain sense of escape. But that Broadway escape is an hour and 45 minutes.
And also, it's in New York. Like, what I say to a lot of people, like, no matter what the year, it could be this year in Chaos, it could be 2001, all those years in between, there are places that feel like a battleground to people. Like, I often say that the festivals that feel most special to me, the ones that feel like a true community, are the ones that are in the most restrictive areas. The places that don't welcome LGBT, won't welcome trans people, won't welcome people who act differently, won't welcome anyone who tries to be unique. Those are the places where the Renaissance Festival feels like the biggest community. And I feel like a lot of people don't realize that the actual people who travel to Renaissance festivals are like a greater majority are, for example, LGBT, or are like poly, for example, or are, that we are the people that these like more conservative or restricted areas don't want to think about. And so that's why when we come around, the people who may not feel at home in their areas suddenly think, oh, for this month, for these 2 months, for these 6 weeks, I have a home where I can just be my true self and not have to worry. And so beyond escapism, it's almost like I'm thinking about you going from liminal to, remind me of your word? Intrastice. It's like, instead of escapism, it's finally being able to go into yourself for the first time in a year, or first time in 15 years, or something like that. Exactly.
And having done the small fair circuit in the Midwest, right? So having done, we were guest cast at Kansas City. I've done Oklahoma. But I've also done, like I said, Nebraska and Amana colonies, which are small fairs. I did White Hart, which is a tiny itty bitty fair. And when you do those fairs in those places, especially, you do see that. But and I have heard people say, this is the first place I felt at home. This is the first place I felt comfortable. This is the first place I felt I could truly be me. And it's funny because maybe that truly being them is having blue hair and fairy wings and walking around, but that's the expression of their inner person. And so a lot of people just lost all of those things for this year. I laugh because we've always said if we ever took a year off from Maryland, we would do Pensick and Burning Man because, they're two things that we never get to do because we do Maryland, right? And of course, the year that we obviously can't do Maryland, we also can't do Pensick or Burning Man. So, it's all of those things, all of the small fairs, but then also all of those tangential things where you see overlaps from Pensick, from Burning Man, from other festivals. I used to run an area of the Popular Culture Association called Festivals and Fairs. And, people would come to me, would present papers on like everything from Burning Man and Pensick and Renaissance festivals to like these crazy small festivals in places. But they were always festivals that drew people, that were out of the norm. They were weird little festivals, the Mothman Festival, a casket festival, a gourd festival, just all of these things. And festival does that. It brings people in. It gives people a chance to participate in that world of Carnivale, that world that Bakhtin talks about, that Rabelais wrote about, where, and a lot of it is tied to, to music. It's part and parcel of it, to food, to the feasting. How many people have said, oh my God, I would do anything just to have, where do I get a smoked turkey leg? Right now, like, how many of you have heard that from somebody? Like, and I'm like,
That's on like every Friends of Faire Facebook group.
I'm like, just have ham.
Oh,
Just have ham. Because that's, I mean, I don't know if you know the story about the time that we got threatened to get shut, really shunned from I'm not sure what the Jewish equivalent of the pulpit is, by a rabbi who came with a friend to the Maryland Renaissance Festival and then wrote a letter basically saying that we were condemning people's souls because we were serving ham and dressing it up and pretending it was turkey.
Oh,
and they literally had to, oh yes, this is a true story. And they literally had to send him a copy of the thing from the turkey farm being like, no. And my question was, how did he know it tasted like ham in the first place?
Exactly.
But it's like, people joke, I would give anything for fried cheese on a stick. I would give anything for, just to have that, whatever that Faire food is. If I had a nickel for every person on my Facebook who posted what they drank on Sunday, the closing day of the Maryland Renaissance Festival, I would never have to work again.
right.
Because everybody was like, I had a bee sting, I had this, I had that, I had an Oktoberfest, I had a cider, everybody was just posting, what they drank that last day, to get that. And that's also part of what I talk about in the book is the difference between festival and other theaters is the scentscape. Most theaters engage at most your sight and your sound, right? Mm-hmm. But at Maryland, at festivals, at Renaissance festivals, you engage not only sight and sound, but smell. And that smell ranges because the amazing smell of the crepes, the amazing smell walking past the steak on a steak booth, the smell walking past the elephants in the joust arena, which thank goodness are right next to each other, and a set of privies because it's, one-stop shopping there. But the smells and then the taste, the food that you get that you just don't get any other time of year. Where are you getting macaroni and cheese on a stick? Where are you getting your smoked turkey legs? I had somebody who was like, I went to Panera to have soup in a bread bowl. It was good, but it wasn't the same. It was one of the saddest things I'd ever heard because Panera does have really good soup in a bread bowl, but it's not the same as walking around with soup in a bread bowl and trying to eat it while you're walking around the streets and you're hearing the music and you're sipping a cider and you're trying to balance your cider and your bread bowl and it's different to sit,
And the smell of roasted nuts.
Oh, I love the roasted nuts.
It's like, if you get if you get a beverage, like a Pepsi, it tastes different if you get it out of a fountain, if it's a fountain drink, or if you're drinking out of a can, or if you're drinking out of plastic, or if you're drinking out of a glass bottle. It's like the same with that bread bowl. Like, it might not be a different container, but everything around you is different if you're eating it at a festival or if you're eating it at Panera. And you have to have the whole thing to make it so good at a festival. Like, everything contributes.
I thought you were going to talk about mugs, because every drink tastes different if you put it in a Renaissance Faire mug.
That's where I thought you were going with that, too.
Nope, sorry.
That's true, too. Yeah, I mean...
But it is true.
It is absolutely true. And what mug you drink it out of, it tastes different. I mean, because I've played, like I said, I've played every year. So I've had everything from your broke down wooden mug, your ceramic mug that didn't even have a handle because I was so poor, and up to, a Fellowship Foundry goblet, which... I've actually broken. I have to say, God bless them. They really do mean it when they give the lifetime guarantee, because I have literally broken my Fellowship Foundry goblet 3 times. And they swore, they're like, this thing really isn't breakable. You don't have to worry about it. And I'm like, you've never actually seen me perform, have you?
You're like, challenge accepted.
It was a Flying Grovel. I went to do a Flying Grovel when I was playing Hilaria, and it was on my hip, and it got between my hip bone and the ground and me, and oh my, I was bruised.
By Flying Grovel, do you mean you were about to grovel at someone, you launch yourself in the air and then grovel?
It was pretty much that, yeah.
That's impressive.
Olivia is now adding to her library of movements.
Challenge accepted.
Flying Grovels, I really would love to get back to being a character that I could do that. My character right now, it's just kind of a how low can you go type of character. And I also really need to rehab. I had back surgery in January, and I was supposed to start rehab on March 17th.
Of course. Yeah.
So I've had no physical therapy after having back surgery.
Oh
So
my God.
I have to spend like the next 8 months getting myself back in shape and really getting ready to be physical for Faire, because my character is incredibly physical. She's Nicole's my character is just nuts. Cecily has like zero filter. She has a little bit of filter, not much.
You have played so many tremendous different roles in the Renaissance Fair circuit, and you have experienced the whole thing, and you have brought a great deal of integrity to the Renaissance Fair world by writing a dissertation on the Renaissance Festival that cites so many other theatrical works and lays the groundwork for future theatrical studies of the Renaissance Fair, as well as coining words to be used to describe it and better communicate the feeling and the experience that is the Renaissance Fair. And that is absolutely incredible, and we want to thank you for your work in this field and for putting the groundwork in front of us, because this is tremendously interesting to those of us who have lived it and been there, and I'm sure to some who will have experienced it, especially folks in the Maryland area in particular. But we are going to come around towards the end of our program here, friends. So my name is Victoria Van Arnhem, and I perform as the Lady Victoria.
And I'm Nicole Skelly, and my show is The Gwendolyn Show.
And I'm Olivia Harding, and I perform as Liv the Druid in Music the Gathering.
Thank you so much to our special guest today, Dr. Tony Korol-Evans. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye, ladies. Bye.